We're all fishermen. We all want to make a living. We've just got to make it fair for the English people.
BBC World Service, welcome to assignment.
The English fishermen, for the last 20 years, have been pushed aside, and we've ended up with a skeleton of a fishery. We have.
There's trouble at sea. I'm on board a fishing boat called Sweetwater off the east coast of England. Its skipper is Darren Kenyon.
I've been fishing since I was 13-year-old, so 40 years now.
And what kind of changes have you seen?
A lot of people, I think, have got fed up, and a lot of people have packed up. But the foreign boats we're allowed to keep catching, French boats or Spanish boats, can come and take the fish. The fish what you're not allowed to catch. If we caught it, we would be arrested on the quayside.
Yes, good morning, sir. This is Thames Highway. What you prefer, sir? Green, red.
Fishing is just a fraction of the UK economy, a tenth of 1%. And many of the boats around here are European, because when Britain became a member of the European Union, it had to share its fishing grounds with other member states. Now that it's left the EU, the government says it's going to take back control of the seas. And many fishermen hope that there'll be a renaissance of the British fishing industry. I'm Lucy Ash, and for this week's assignment, I'm in Darren's home port of Grimsby to ask how realistic such hopes are and to understand why fishing remains such an emotive issue, despite its steep decline.
It would be lovely to get, our fishing rights back, but we'll believe it when we see it, because we've been let down year after year after year after year. We get demoralised, I'm afraid.
But you still enjoy it?
Oh, yeah, I do.
In your eyes.
Yes. Yeah, I do. I'd rather be at sea than be ashore. There's a lot of trouble ashore, isn't there? Hey, I'll put you on the ladder, eh?
Ashore for Sweetwater is Grimsby's mid-19th century fish dock.
All right, you on?
Tonight, Darren's unloading a good catch, crabs and lobsters worth over $2,000. He's taken to inshore shell fishing because it isn't subject to the same strict European Union sharing arrangements as trawling deeper waters, as he used to do.
We used to work the winter on the cod fishery, we used to work the summer season on the skate fishery, and then we'd go further out, September time, move offshore and fish for dogfish. We did used to stink. You walk in the door, your missus knows you're home, without seeing you,
So back in the day, what would this port have looked like?
Oh, it was unrecognisable. We could walk all the way along the trawlers across the dock, step from boat to boat.
Because there was so many of them.
There was probably, I don't know, along this north wall, there must have been 70, 80 big trawlers. And then we had the smaller vessels and then inshore vessels. It was unbelievable how many men worked on the fish docks.
So this is like what you'd imagine, a typical scene, lads unloading the catch at the end of a long day at sea. But how many people are there in Grimsby now doing what you're doing?
There's only about 10 of us in Grimsby, really.
Only 10?
Yes, we're a handful of people, I'm afraid. That's all we are.
When I was 15, the company I was working for on the dock, during my summer holidays, let me go to sea, and I took to it like a duck to water.
Kurt Christensen got his first taste of Grimsby's glory as a teenager in the 1960s, after his parents moved to the region from his native Denmark.
We fished in some bad weather, it was rough. We came in, caught a huge trip.
Caught a huge trip?
A big quantity of fish, yeah, we had a good trip of fish. So I earned a lot of money. When I came home, my father said to me, "Well, son, what do you think to fishing?" And I've never seen that much money in one place. And I said, "It's brilliant, Dad." So I pulled off 5 £1 notes, gave it to my mum, and I said, "Here, Mum, get yourself a nice dress." It was halcyon times. I mean, it was brilliant. When fishing's good, it's astonishing. You can live like rock stars if you want.
Grimsby's stories are legendary. Stories of the 3-day millionaires, fishermen who came ashore flush with cash, who'd keep taxis on the meter outside pubs all day long whilst they drank and caroused until their next voyage a few days later. They shared fishing grounds with the crews of a few other North European countries, as they had done for centuries, and liaised closely to monitor stocks. But it seemed as if the fish would never run out, and everyone could catch what they liked. Kurt would go on to be a successful boat owner and fish merchant. Then the world changed.
Then we joined the EEC, the European Economic Community.
That was the forerunner to today's European Union. Britain's membership began in 1973.
We got involved in this disaster that was Brussels. And the first couple of 3 years was fine. We could apply for grants to build a new ship. We could apply for grants for safety gear and new engines, more fuel efficient. And the waters we had could sustain the British fleet. But then all of a sudden, it wasn't the UK fleet. It was everybody. It was equal access for everyone.
Britain's seas were now a common European resource. In 1983, Brussels introduced a quota system, allocating each country a share of the fish. For many species, it gave European boats, by law, a greater entitlement to fish in British waters than the British themselves.
They caught everything.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, you've caught it all. Within 3 years or 4 years, we've caught our quota by September.
And what did you do then?
Well, then you just lay up. You go on the dole. And then, because the earnings were dropping, people try to find work elsewhere. You know, you've got guys in a cake factory, perfectly brilliant skippers, sticking cherries on cakes. Where does your pride go with that? It's wrong.
Today, the warren of little streets behind the docks are eerily quiet. Many of the old warehouses are still standing, but most of them are boarded up and in a pretty sorry state. The saddest structure of all, though, is what was once the world's largest ice factory. It used to churn out ice blocks by the ton, and then they were crushed up and sent to the dock. Now the building's abandoned, the roof's falling in, and it's surrounded by a fence. That's because it's just too dangerous to go inside. It's a fitting symbol, perhaps, of Grimsby's fall from grandeur.
Freeman Street, once a haunt of the three-day millionaires, has seen better days too. Many businesses are shuttered up, leaving a dreary residue of penny arcades, betting shops and charity outlets. But at the back of an indoor market here, you can also find the local office of the town's Member of Parliament. Lia Nietzsche, the daughter of an Italian immigrant, stood for the governing Conservative Party in last year's general election and became the first non-socialist to win the Grimsby seat in almost a century. Hers was the story of that election. Across the English North and Midlands, seats which had been Labour strongholds for decades fell, turning Britain's so-called Red Wall blue. These were also the areas where support for leaving the European Union was strongest in the referendum of 2016. Leah voted to stay inside the EU, but almost 70% of people here wanted out. And now, she tells me, she's determined to reach out to a long-neglected constituency.
The argument that I've heard year and year and year again is fishing's only worth 0.1% of GDP, so why does it matter? Well, it matters because they're our waters and we should have some influence on them, but also 0.1% of GDP, you've got to remember that that was shared between majority 3 fishing towns in England and 2 or 3 in Scotland. 0.1% of GDP is worth a huge amount to those communities.
So how important was fishing to people here when it came to voting in the referendum about whether to stay in the European Union?
Fishing was absolutely and utterly number one. Absolutely. People still feel that rawness. We have some of the richest fishing grounds in Europe and we don't have any control, and that is the reason why people voted for Brexit, voted for Boris Johnson.
Britain's now out of the European Union, but under a transition arrangement, it remains in its common fisheries policy until the end of this year. Lia Nietzsche insists that after that, better times lie ahead.
We will get our waters back on the 1st of January. We can't and don't necessarily want to fish everything in our waters, but we want control of that water. That's the bottom line, really.
So what are your hopes for the fishing industry once Britain gets control back over the seas?
Come 1st of January, we want to be out there. We are ready to go. What we need to look at is a modern trawling industry. We need to make sure that it's going to be a modern industry and so that young people can come into it. There's room for it to grow, and I think the town is going to flourish once we've left the EU.
And fishing as well?
Yes, fishing will flourish again.
How old is that pond? Could be 4 or 5 years old. 4 or 5 years old. Look at that.
As if to prove this tiny industry's talismanic importance, Boris Johnson himself donned a white hat, white coat and white rubber boots when he came fishing for votes during the general election campaign.
90, 95.
At the fish auction in the docks, he posed for selfies, clutching a haddock. Yet there's an ironic precedent for taking back control, and it's relevant to Grimsby's decline, because even before Britain joined what became the EU, its own fishermen were ejected from the fisheries of another country. The so-called Cod Wars, a series of fishing disputes from the 1950s to 70s, resulted in a 200-mile exclusion zone around Iceland. That rendered the deep-sea fleets of Grimsby unviable, even before European quotas. These days, most of the cod and haddock on sale at the very auction Mr. Johnson visited is caught by Icelandic boats and shipped here in refrigerated containers. The glassy-eyed fish are unpacked, displayed and put up for sale in big crates packed with ice.
You just come out of the auction this morning. Was it a good day?
Yeah, we've had a reasonable day. Supplies have been a bit tight this week. Most of the supplies, of course, now come from Iceland and a bit from Norway.
I'm at the fish market on a cold and drizzly morning, just after sunrise, to meet its chief executive, Martin Boyers, who tells me the shift to imports means his objective is not more quotas, but rather seamless foreign trade.
In our case, because we don't have any landings of vessels, we don't have a particular connection to quotas or the CFP. What we do have a connection to is Iceland and the fish being exported. So our main concern is going to be tariffs and duties that could be imposed on Icelandic fish.
One Dutch university study a couple of years ago concluded that without a deal, Britain would lose more from tariff and non-tariff barriers on its fish trade than it would gain from exclusive access to its own waters.
If you're dealing in a perishable commodity, so from Scotland you've got fish going all the way down to Dover to be exported by lorry into France. Well, if you've got something that's going to deteriorate, as fish does, then you need to move it.
As somebody once said, there's nothing in so much of a hurry as a dead fish. And as the bustle this morning suggests, Grimsby still excels at filleting and packaging what other people catch, adding value before selling it on in time to make healthy profits. The fish processing industry here now employs some 5,000 people. But to prosper, it needs a steady, sustainable source of raw material.
That's cod, but it's a smaller one. And then just look here.
Oh my God, is that a cod?
That's also a cod. That fish weighs about 7 or 8 kilo.
Really?
And that fish is about 5 years old. If you allow them to breed and grow, cod are one of the biggest growing species.
As Martin explains, Iceland asserted its 200-mile limit to stop overfishing. Any similar British exclusion zone will have to protect fish stocks too, he says.
This is what's daft about where we are with the common fishing policy. When we take over the fisheries, a lot of what it does, we will continue with. You cannot over-exploit the fish.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's a European quota or the UK. A lot of the regulations will remain the same.
Today, Grimsby has new sources of fish, new priorities, and even new uses for the sea itself. If you stand here on the shoreline, you can see the gleaming white blades of wind turbines a few kilometres offshore. Thousands more of these are planned much further out in what used to be fishing grounds as Britain tries to wean itself off fossil fuels.
So this is our service operation vessel. You can see there's a helipad on top, so there's heli operations. It's basically just a flotel for our technicians that work out.
A flotel? You mean like a hotel that floats?
Yeah.
I'm at Grimsby's deeper water dock now, where 23-year-old Georgia Cheryl is standing in front of a gigantic orange vessel, so tall it looks in danger of toppling over. Georgia's a turbine technician for a Danish company called Ørsted, which builds and runs offshore wind farms. Some she can commute to. Others, like Hornsey 1, one of the world's largest, are further from the coast, and she and her colleagues stay out at sea for weeks at a time.
You have your own cabin and everything that you need on a night time when you get back. It's like a little community, really. You work with them as much as you see your family at home, pretty much, so you spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah, so you have to get on, really.
Yeah.
A bit like a trawler crew, then, except that Georgia's job is more steady, much safer, and unlike fishing, which traditionally viewed women on board as bad luck, it welcomes both sexes. These days, says Georgia, everyone in Grimsby's talking about wind.
With all the new recruitment going on, I've had so many people message and ask so many questions about Ørsted itself because they all want to be in the position I am.
And what about the effect on the local economy?
There's a lot. I think it's over about 80% of people that live within an hour's drive of Grimsby that work at Ørsted. And again, with Hornsey 2, 3 and 4 coming up, there's going to be a lot.
The new
more,
wind farms?
Yeah, the new wind farms coming up, there's going to be a lot more people from Grimsby that are going to be working.
So how far do you think you can go?
No, I know that I've got a job for life here. We're growing as a company and it's just getting bigger and bigger every single day.
Plenty of ex-fishermen have also entered the wind energy sector, navigating service craft or using their own boats as supply vessels. Some even believe Grimsby's fishing legacy is the main reason renewable energy here has thrived. But not everyone's a fan. Darren Kenyon, who took me out on his boat at the start of this programme, believes the new arrivals are slowly squeezing the fishermen out.
It's been a real bad thing for us. They've taken thousands of miles of sea up and put wind poles in. They've gridded the sea with electricity cables.
Does the wind farm interfere with your job as a fisherman?
Yes, all the time.
How?
Because we're having a job getting crews, like I say. An inshore boat probably pays £150, £200 a day. You can go on a wind cat for the same money.
Wind cats are catamarans that take service staff out to the turbines.
We have wind cats passing us at 20, 25 knots on our bow. I've reported them that many times. You've seen the size of them and you've seen the size of us, you know, it knocks us around. And we pen in and out the dock. Now, obviously, the wind cats have got to do the same. Now, as a commercial fishing vessel, we have to wait and we have to be last. We do.
Why do they get priority?
Because they do.
So it's like being stuck at a very long red traffic light.
Well, we're just wasting fuel. And in the summertime, me lobsters especially, they're getting warmer and warmer and warmer.
We're in Darren's storehouse where his lobsters, kept in huge shallow tanks, are seemingly unaware of their fate. Small and inshore operations like his are best at spreading the money around, he says. The crabs he's landed tonight will be boiled up tomorrow at his own dockside workshop and sold on by stallholders, creating local jobs at each turn. But of course, fishing of any sort is now so tiny, it's completely overshadowed by growing sectors like renewable energy. Certainly, Darren doesn't expect the authorities to help out people like him at the expense of wind farms. In fact, after years of neglect, he doesn't trust the British government at all, not even to take control of the waters from the EU.
They say all these things they're going to do for it, get people voting for them, then once they're in, fish will be traded for something else. We'll trade it for some oranges or something, won't we? We will. It's crazy.
That kind of pessimism still haunts British fisheries, even as the politicians talk of a renaissance.
Look at that, look.
Oh my God. Oh, so the fish, they fall down that chute then, do they?
They go down into that reception hopper, yes. And that will hold 120 boxes of fish.
Further up the coast, I meet Danny Normandale, a 48-year-old who owns 2 trawlers. They're just the kind of independent craft that once crammed into harbours up and down the country. But as Danny points out, those scenes are unlikely ever to return. Any future expansion in the British catch will look very different, he says, simply because of the economics involved.
You won't get any new young blood coming in because they just can't afford to take it on. If you buy a second-hand boat such as this one, you might be 600,000 for the boat, and then you'll be another 600,000 for the licence to put on the boat. So, you know, you're up to 1.2 million there. That's without the fish quota.
That's over $1.5 million.
So it's a massive, massive outlay to get started, and who has that kind of outlay? They don't.
The even bigger question is how Britain can reform the existing quota system. EU quota has become a tradable commodity, and its value has soared. Some have millions of dollars invested in it. According to the environmental group Greenpeace, just 5 rich UK families own or control nearly a third of Britain's fishing quota. Danny complains that the whole system conspires to push small players out.
If I get given 10% more quota, that might amount to 10 tonnes. That's it. I might gain 10 tonnes for the year. But some of the bigger companies, if they get given 10% more, they might gain 1,000 tonnes. That's not a level playing field.
Retiring smaller fishermen have often sold their quota, ironically sometimes to Europeans. Others rent their allocation on a monthly basis. They're known in the trade as slipper skippers, supposedly sitting snug and warm at home while others go fishing. In fact, Danny's done that himself. It's so hard to make a living from fish, he says, that he's branched out into the energy sector. Not wind in this case, but North Sea oil.
We're looking after fibre optic cables for oil companies, and we'll guard oil rigs where the lights have gone out. Sometimes the lights go out, so we go out and we'll just be a mobile lighthouse for a month at a time. So we're just doing whatever we have to do to keep going, really.
How does that make you feel?
It's disappointing. It's not the thrill of the chase anymore. You're not leaving the harbour with 1,000 empty boxes aboard and 20 tonnes of ice with your mind on the game, you know, the thrill of the hunt. It's no longer there. Now you're going out just thinking that I'm going to go around and round an oil rig for a month and I'm going to get dizzy. Yeah, it's not the same.
When will you next go out fishing again?
In the new year.
Really? Not until then?
No, it won't be till then because I've rented out my quota, so there's nothing to go for now. Yes, until the 1st of January, we're kind of stuck. There's no fish left for us to catch now.
So the outlook for getting lots of new trawlers, new fleets, now we've come out of the European Union, is not looking very bright.
If you're in an established family, if you can still go ahead, but if you're not coming from an established family, I don't think there's a lot of hope for the younger generation, no. It'll be the big companies that survive, and there won't be any small independent companies like ourselves left.
And does that matter? I mean, obviously it's a tragedy for each fishing family, but for the country as a whole, does it matter?
Well, you're losing part of your history, we're losing part of our heritage, and I think it's a shame to lose your heritage, because I'm extremely proud of our heritage.
Gale warnings are in operation for sea areas Iceland, Faroes, Bailey, Hebrides, Rockall, Merlin, Shannon, Finisterre.
Rebuilding Grimsby's once mighty fishing industry will be tough, but we should bear in mind that fishermen are used to meeting adversity.
Force 6 to Gale, Force 8.
Whatever the challenges, they'll surely fight to save their industry going under completely.
Methinks I see on each small craft a crew with hearts so brave.
Fishing captures the imagination here in Grimsby. Refrigerated imports and wind farms can't compete with that.
And it's 70 boys and men, well us from Grimsby town.
The exhibits in Grimsby's Fishing Heritage Centre pay tribute to Britain's image of itself as a proud seafaring nation. an island whose seas have always acted as both a defence from foreign invasion and a route to buccaneering wealth, often won at huge personal cost.
This is the BBC Home Service from Manchester. Word has just been received that the upturned hull of the Grimsby trawler Lafayette has been sighted. There are no reports of the captain and 19 men on board at the time.
Methinks I see them yet again, and all on board's all right.
However minuscule fishing is in national terms, the belief that Britain's fearless fishermen were sacrificed to serve the interests of foreigners and politicians in London is something the government today can't be seen to ignore. As for Grimsby, there'll be no return to the glory days, but perhaps an end to the decline. When I asked one fisherman what qualities you need for the job, he didn't miss a beat. Stubbornness, he said. Grimsby is a place where hope dies last.
They long to fight that bitter night and battle with the swell.
That's all from me, Lucy Ash. Assignment was produced by Mike Gallagher.